Hi, my name is Amanda Panacea, and you're listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. This is a community for self-healers, biohackers, practitioners, and any other helping professionals. You're in the right place if you're seeking conversations about how pain becomes passion, the connection between physical, energetic, mental, and our spiritual self, finding your body's ancient wisdom, the latest biohacking technologies, clinical research, and if you just want to nerd out about complex biochemistry and quantum physics. But this is also for entrepreneurs who seek infinite abundance and a supportive community. So pour a cup of King coffee or Sisters tea and let's join the revolution. Hello, my beautiful people. I am Amanda Panacea, and welcome to the Healer Revolution podcast. I am really excited today to introduce one of my new friends, Margaret Barry. Margaret completed her functional nutritional therapy practitioner training in 2014 and immediately started working with clients. Over the years, she's continued to expand her knowledge base with additional certifications, including hair tissue mineral analysis, functional blood chemistry, fascia fitness, prenatal and postpartum corrective exercise, and lymphatic exercise. Margaret specializes in mineral balancing, women's metabolic health, and corrective exercise. She works with clients one-on-one in addition to her group programs and courses. She is passionate about helping women feel strong, energetic, comfortable, and confident in their bodies, and operates her practice out of North Carolina, where she lives with her husband and 2 children. I'm really excited for you all to hear our conversation on mineral balancing, hormones, and general health of women. So enjoy. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Panacea, and welcome to this episode of the Healer Revolution. I am really excited to introduce my new friend, Margaret Barry, to the show. Hi, Margaret.
Hey, Amanda. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get to know you. Of course, I found you like I found everyone on Instagram, and you were talking about mineral balancing, and you had some really funny and also very educational content. So I was like, this girl gets it. She's cool. I think we would have a good conversation.
Yes, absolutely. Love minerals.
Yeah. So your handle on Instagram is, what is it again? Muscles and Motherhood?
Muscles and Motherhood. Yep. With the underscore before. Yes.
Yeah. And I almost feel like it could be muscles, minerals, and motherhood because you have so many. Yeah. You have so much good content on all of that. So we'll definitely get into some of the questions I have about minerals and kind of how you got there. But I would really love to hear how you became a practitioner and how you learned all these things, because you have a ton of free information that people can download and watch and learn. And you just have like a really good, well-rounded grasp of like the human body, the human condition, and how to like stay healthy or reverse health conditions. So what is your story?
Yeah, so my story starts off, I guess I could start when I was maybe 16 or 17. I started to become more aware of how my body looked and also the inputs that we put into it, like food. And I feel like that's the time in my life too, where I had a lot of body image issues. So that's really kind of where I started. I started looking at nutrition as like a way to manipulate and control my body. And obviously that has some issues in terms of, later understandings that I would come to as far as the reason why we support the body. But I didn't ever be formally diagnosed with an eating disorder, but I definitely had the characteristics for at least 3: anorexia, binge eating, and probably some orthorexia thrown in there for good measure. But I really had all 3 of those from probably the age 16, 17 till when I was around 20, where I had really dieted myself down to a very, very low weight that was very unhealthy. And I actually remember distinctly being out in public somewhere, feeling so lightheaded and out of it that I almost fainted we were at a football game. And I remember I was barely able to walk up the steps of the stadium. And I remember thinking, if this is health, if being, extremely low BMI at the height that I am. Like, if this is health, then I don't want to do this anymore. This is miserable, And that at that point, I just kind of had that moment where I was like, I'm tired of punishing my body. I'm tired of all the restrictions I placed on myself. I had a very limited view on food and nutrition. And from there, I actually kind of started realizing, just through my own studies, some truths about that food and nutrition is actually something that's supposed to nourish and support our body, not used as a bludgeon to punish it, or, use it in a way to manipulate our body as the sole purpose of health. And I was 21 when I started the program at the Nutritional Therapy Association for their nutritional therapy certification. And that really helped me get it in my head that nutrition is not just, something to manipulate and control the size and shape of my body. It's really more about nourishing the body, making sure that the body has what it needs to live life, so that I can feel strong in my body. I can feel capable in my day-to-day tasks, and just really be a supportive tool. And I learned a lot, and that kind of helped me get off of the narrow view that I had on nutrition as well. And of course, my mood was better when I was actually eating,
For sure.
So yeah, I was no longer starving. So, but yeah, that's kind of like a heavy way to start out, but it is part of my story. Like that background of very dark place, kind of coming to the understanding of what nutrition really is, that it's not just about what you look like. It's also about your nutritional status, your physical health, and your mental and spiritual health as well. Like, that's also part of the equation. We tend to block those out and not really take into account those things. But I've actually had also, I was thinking about this the other day, I've had what I would consider 3 different great awakenings in my nutrition journey. And one of those was after I did my training at the NTA, I started working with people, and I would look at people's food journals, and I would see what they're eating. You're analyzing for the micronutrient, macronutrient makeup. And something I noticed was that a lot of women especially were really just not getting nearly enough calories. They weren't intending to do that, but it was just like, oh, this is 1,400 calories and you're working out 5 days a week. That's probably not going to be conducive to energy and sleep and mood and hormones. And I just kind of went, wow, okay. And then I started seeing that, again, people are getting that message, eat more whole foods, but it is also important to make sure you're getting enough of those whole foods. And so I started working with that in mind, kind of with women on that front. And then, so that was my first great awakening, was like, wow, we need to make sure we're eating enough of these good foods that we are preparing and, procuring for ourselves, that's important. I mean, at that same time, I had a time where I was actually doing yet another diet, because also in this time of where I was, had my eating disorder, came out of that, I had done every single diet approach. Like, if you can name a diet approach, the only one I didn't do was the HCG diet, thank goodness. But I did every other one.
I did that one.
All vegan. Oh, you did the HCG? Oh gosh.
I've done all of them as well.
Oh no, yes. I've heard from people that one's like the one that it really messes you up. So, but yeah, so in the midst of that, like kind of before I went through the NTA, and honestly, even sometimes after, I would experiment with these different diets. But I would do, I would do the low carb, I would do the high carb, no fat, I would do the vegan, the raw vegan, the time restricted eating, intermittent fasting. I did I even did carnivore for a little while, actually. So I bounced around to all these different ones. And actually, it was during the time when I was doing a diet, which was it was kind of like a carb cycling type of diet, where you do low carb, high carb, low carb, and at that time, the person who was leading the program was like, now you need to make sure that, for women, you're at least hitting 2,000 calories, that's going to be one of your days, you're going to hit that. And then you're going to drop it back for a slight deficit to 1,800. So I start off being like, I know I eat over 2,000 calories. This, why am I even tracking this? So I tracked it. And at the end of the day, even though I was like, oh yeah, I'm eating a lot. At the end of the day, it was like, you're eating 1,600 calories. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing this too. I've seen this in my clients, but I didn't even look at myself. And I was like, I'm doing that too. So ironically, it was that diet that actually helped me realize I'm not eating enough for I'm 5'7". I was very active at the time. I'd work out 4 to 5 days a week. And then I had a baking business where I did gluten-free, vegan, specialty baked goods. So that was the thing I specialized in. So I'm on my feet for 8 hours a day, then working out and eating 1,600 calories. Like, no wonder I was having issues with energy, my hair falling out and stuff like that. So that's my first big great awakening, was that I was not like eating enough, and that I would see people not eating enough. That was like in 2016, 2015. And then the minerals came later. So the two biggest, I would say for myself, like I said, the calories need to be enough. And then the minerals came later when I was pregnant with my second child in 2 years, because they're 19 months apart. So I was, back-to-back pregnancies. And I just remember feeling so depleted at the beginning of that pregnancy, because I was still breastfeeding my daughter and I was pregnant. I just felt like I was having the life sucked out of me, because my daughter was still breastfeeding and I was also growing a baby. But I realized that I was reading more about minerals, and I kind of got interested in them because a lot of people were like, oh, it can help you with energy. And so I started incorporating more, knowing that I had a higher need of mineral intake in pregnancy. And I actually had a better pregnancy and postpartum than I did with my first child, when I should have been less depleted as far as the nutritional stores. And I was like, wow, this is something maybe I need to continue to do. And then I started getting into HTMA and applying that to my practice, and learning more about how that interfaces with even things I'd learned before, like, for example, with parasites and iron, like those connections, parasites and copper, like all these other components that I had been had some knowledge of before. They were now kind of coming full circle with the mineral piece. So those have been kind of two of the biggest things that I could point to as the parts of my process where I had changed my mind or learned something new that really impacted me as a person. But anyway, all that to say, today I do testing for women with mineral balancing. I have a specialty in the prenatal postpartum time as well, because it's just a special interest of mine too. And I really enjoy helping people understand how the mineral balance piece affects their life, their energy, especially women of childbearing age, or moms who've had back-to-back kids. It's very depleting. We lose about 10% of our minerals with every pregnancy, and then breastfeeding uses some as well. So that's kind of like a brief but not so brief synopsis of my nutritional journey. So
awesome. Thanks for sharing. And then where do the muscles come into play?
Mm-hmm, yes. So I actually got into that this is also an interesting part of the story, was that I was at the same time, I was like maybe 20 or so. I was, because back then I was about 50, 60 pounds heavier than I am now. So I've also been 50, 60 pounds smaller than I am now, but also 50 to 60 pounds heavier. So I've been all over the place as far as my body size. But back then I kind of had that rebound weight gain after my eating disorder, which honestly, I needed a lot of that. But I had been looking into exercise, and I started doing an exercise method that was very gentle, restorative, and had a lymphatic focus. So I ended up getting certified in that. It's called T-TAP. And I got that I started doing it in 2014, got certified in 2016. And this particular practitioner who taught this method was really big on the lymphatic system and the myofascial network and how that interfaces with muscles. So I already knew some stuff about muscles because I had my personal trainer certification, but then that piece kind of expanded my understanding. She was talking about this stuff in 2013, 2014, back when it was not as mainstream as it is now. And yeah, that really expanded my knowledge on that, because at that time as well, when I started getting into it, we actually didn't know this until this past year, but my childhood family home had mold in it from the time I moved in. So that also contributed to my weight gain, my eye puffiness right after, I was like 17, 18 was when it was the worst, after I kind of came out of the eating disorder. And the one thing that helped me at that time, because of course I wasn't knowledgeable about all the binders and the sauna and all this other stuff, the one thing I knew that helped me, that I could physically feel the inflammation leaving my body, was doing more of the lymphatic exercise techniques. which didn't cause too much of a cortisol spike, but still enough to maintain some muscle mass and then see some inch loss from that. So that's kind of where that component came in, because it really is such a wide variety of things that I'm interested in. I'm always thinking, oh, this is my thing I'm really interested in. And then I'm like, oh no, but the lymphatic system and the fascia and the middle.
Yeah.
I'm sure you know how how that is.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like you have to know all of it, because once you start to go down the rabbit hole of one thing, you're like, oh, but it's connected to everything. So I have to learn about everything.
You have to go learn and chase those rabbit trails.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Never ending for sure.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely. It is.
So that's a really fantastic story. It sounds like, the things you learned along the way were just some of the interests you picked up, which I think is definitely pretty common. So something you mentioned was the HTMA, which stands for hair tissue mineral analysis, which is something that is actually, when I first had my first health crash and lost all my hair, and the doctor I was seeing called it adrenal fatigue, of course, she actually did the HTMA with me. And this was back in maybe 2014, 2015. And I thought it was so cool. And I forgot about it. I moved to another city. I stopped seeing her. I got better. I was, taking care of myself a little bit more. And then all of a sudden last year, I was like, I'm going to do another one of those. Where did those go? Nobody talks about them. And then I feel like I found everybody that was talking about them.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I did another one. And one of the biggest things on mine where I had a debilitatingly horrible calcium shell. So I saw you talking about this as well. Could you explain what a calcium shell is and what this looks like on the HTMA?
Yes. And this is actually something that I've had as well. So calcium shell team, lots of people that I know have also had this. So a calcium shell is essentially a mineral imbalance that consists of a very, very, very high level of extracellular calcium. So it's outside the bones, because that's where calcium is primarily stored. It's outside the bones, and it's in your connective tissue. It's in the myofascial system. It just kind of goes outside of the bone. And that can happen for a variety of reasons. Trauma is a huge one. I honestly have seen where people will have the calcium shell pattern, and maybe they just had a really difficult, a family member passed away, or they had a breakup or something like that. Calcium is a very hard and sturdy mineral, and it's almost like the body is putting that out as a protective shell against the other things that are going on in the person's life. It's not always the case for that, but I have seen it quite a bit in connection with it. But that extracellular calcium can cause so many different symptoms that are very broad in scope. So you can have someone who has a lot of issues with joint pain, a lot of muscle tension where they just feel like their muscles are just not going to release. You can even have certain, the calcium that's there in the tissues, it can be anywhere. So I've seen people where they have a very high level of calcium in their bladder, and they can't fully empty their bladder because we need a right balance of calcium, magnesium, sodium, potassium in those tissues. And when it is really high, filled with calcium, it's not going to be able to do that very well. And you're going to have issues with, bladder leakage or incontinence or inability to fully empty the bladder. It can also go in the gallbladder. I've seen that a lot of times where people have unexplained gallbladder problems, and it ends up being the high calcium is calcifying. That's where we get the word calcification from. High calcium can be impacting the gallbladder as well. And as for what this looks like on the HTMA, depending on which lab you use, usually it'll have the calcium will start on the far left. That is going to be very high. Now, there can be different degrees of a calcium shell. So you can have a calcium shell that is at a 1 times calcium shell, which is in the hundreds. You can have a 2 or 3 double or triple calcium shell where it's in the 200s, 300s, 400s. I think I've seen it. The highest it's been is in the 400, 500 range, which is pretty extreme.
That was me.
Very extreme. And it's hard to the other thing that makes it so difficult to deal with is that usually the sodium and potassium, especially the potassium, the function of that is decreased. so that then you have that ratio, that's the calcium to potassium ratio, is now super duper high because of that high calcium. And then you have the hypothyroid symptoms, and the cells need the potassium to be sensitized to the thyroid hormones. So then you end up having low thyroid function, even though maybe the thyroid is making hormones. Oftentimes it's not, but just for sake of argument, let's say it is making the hormones. If the cells don't have that right balance of minerals, that thyroid hormone is just not going to be able to get into the cell. So it's almost like insulin resistance, the phenomenon of insulin resistance, but applied to the thyroid. You have that resistance to getting the thyroid hormone into the cell. So it is just, it's really a challenge to deal with. Usually people, when they are working through it, will have symptoms. They will always have detox symptoms. And I will always, like, if I'm working with someone who has a calcium shell, I'm always like, hey, you need to work on, if you need to do some nervous system and trauma work while you're breaking up this calcium shell, because the old stuff is going to tend to come up. If it is been put out for a reason, the body is oftentimes going to release some of those emotions when you're going through it, because that is also stored in the body tissue. And when the calcium's there, they both got to mobilize out. So I'll tell people, like, you may feel really tired. You may have depression. A lot of times people will feel an increase in the symptoms that they have. So let's say that their symptom is that their muscles are super duper tight and tense. They make it worse for 4 or 5 days, and then it goes away, and then it comes back as another wave of the calcium is releasing. But that is one that I will always warn people about. But they're still always like, is this a detox from the calcium? I have a headache. My shoulders are really sore. I'm like, yes, it is. It's the shell breaking up. But one of the most important cofactors for that calcium shell is the vitamin K2. That's the king when it comes to helping mobilize that back out, as well as supporting things like the adrenal glands to make sure that they are functioning better, because typically that high calcium level is going to depress that autonomic nervous system balance between the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. And that is just going to be another side effect. But it's become one of my patterns where I'm like, maybe I'm going to start specializing this in a little more, because I have seen it so many times over the last couple of years. But when you change that changes so much, because it's your body chemistry. If your body chemistry is off, it's going to affect like everything that's part of the body. So it really is beneficial to have that, working on that, especially if there are any concerns as far as the symptoms that are associated with it too.
Wow, you wrapped that up so perfectly.
Oh, thank you. I was hoping it makes sense.
Yeah, you touched base on everything I wanted to talk about. So yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that calcium, it was almost 600, the calcium shell, when I first did it in 2015. And at the time, I had just gone through some really traumatic stuff, a breakup that was horribly traumatic. And I was like painting my nails gray, and I felt like emotionally, like I had nothing, like I couldn't feel any emotions. And when they told me I had the calcium shell, it was horribly like one of the worst they'd ever seen. So I was like, oh, that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And then just recently when I did the other one, it was last November. So I just actually sent in more hair to do another one, but it was still pretty bad. It was still in the 200. So it was still like double the calcium shell.
That's a third of what it was. So
yeah. It's been a good couple years. And, last year I was going through topical steroid withdrawal. So that was the most stressful thing I've ever gone through. So I'm hoping this next one will be a lot more improved. Because that other big connection you pointed out was something else that I'm starting to realize happens with a lot of women, is how much that impacts your thyroid. And when you get your labs and all your thyroid hormones are perfect, you're like, okay, why do I have all the symptoms of hypothyroidism if my thyroid hormones are perfect? And that key piece of the puzzle is that calcium potassium ratio, and your cells becoming hardened and calcified and not actually getting the thyroid hormone that you're making. So you mentioned, let's see, the potassium. And then one of the other big pieces that I learned about that I've been also heavy doing was the vitamin K and K2, and then magnesium, just like drowning myself in magnesium, which I feel like when you see that and you're like, oh, I just need to take more potassium, but you got to remember that magnesium helps with the absorption of the potassium. So when you start to work with someone and you're going to start balancing minerals, I know this is like a endless question, but especially with calcium shell, is there any like products or adrenal cocktail recipes that you kind of like to start with?
Yes. So if someone has like a really, really high calcium shell, I will do some kind of a adrenal cocktail. So my basic formula for this, and it can be, lots of variations, but I have it memorized, so I'll mention it. It's 4 tablespoons of, it's a 1/4 cup actually of both coconut water and orange juice. But you can also use grapefruit juice. You can use pomegranate juice. You can use really a different type of juice that you want, that you tolerate well. So 1/4 cup coconut water, 1/4 cup of juice of your choice, maybe containing vitamin C. I really like pineapple. That's one of my favorites. It has just as much vitamin C as oranges and maybe even a little bit more. So that's a great combo. Then you would do like a 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt, 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar. Now, some people are sensitive to potassium in the form of cream of tartar. So I always tell people to take it easy, try it with a pinch first and see how it's tolerated. But then sometimes for extra minerals too, in addition to that adrenal cocktail, you can do just a little bit of sea salt in your water. You can do mineral drops. There's a lot of different kinds. There are a couple of ones that I use most frequently, actually 3, would be the Quinton hypertonic solution. They also have isotonic as well. That's like a purified seawater. I also use the CT minerals as well in water, drinks, or adrenal cocktails. And then the concentrates mineral drops as well are kind of 3 of the ones that I would incorporate, because it's really important to just start getting those in, because if someone has a high calcium level, they're going to have the depressed thyroid function. They're oftentimes going to have the depressed adrenal function too. And so we need to start getting some of those minerals in that are going to help them have some energy and support their energy right off the bat. I will have people where they are not getting enough sea salt, they're not getting enough potassium, and they start adding that in. And within a couple of weeks, they're like, something shifting. And again, this is for people who, I've worked with people who have the chronic Lyme, some people who have mold toxicity, some people who are just moms have had kids back to back to back. And this is something that is safe to do. It can benefit all these groups, but also it just, again, supporting the body's own energy manufacture system in terms of the minerals, which provide the cofactors for all the enzymes, for all of the functions of the body. So that's something that can be done as well. And also, if the calcium is high, potassium is very likely low, or the function is depressed in the body. So doing more foods that have potassium in them, a couple of the highest ones, there's some food-based ones as well too, but the stuff like coconut water is one that does have pretty high potassium. My all-time favorite is aloe vera juice. I like to use the one from Lakewood Organics, the inner fillet. And I crave that. It might just be because I need potassium, but I love the aloe juice. And it has almost 1,000 milligrams of potassium per cup. And so it's very, very rich source. We need anywhere from 3,700 to 4,500 milligrams of potassium per day. And most people will be like, especially with the calcium shell, be like, oh, I'm getting enough potassium. But usually they'll say, oh, I eat 2 bananas. And I'm like, that's 800 milligrams. You still got several thousand to go before you get to how much you need. And then they're like, oh, well, that's why I'm deficient then. So that is one that can be really helpful. And then also, as far as different plant foods that have potassium, beet greens and I think also collard greens are very high. Beet greens have like 1,200 milligrams of potassium, something insane. I usually have people cook those down really well, have them in a soup, have them as a side dish with some butter to make sure they're absorbing the vitamin K that's also in that form in those greens. So I would definitely be doing more potassium for this group as well. And honestly, also the vitamin K, K2, like you were saying, that's a huge one, because that is the cofactor that helps us take that calcium, extracellular calcium, and it helps us escort that back into the bone where it is supposed to be, and the teeth. That's the other thing I wanted to mention. Huge difference for people who have the calcium shell, start working on it. Suddenly they're like, my teeth aren't sensitive anymore. That's what happened to me. I had teeth sensitivity for years after I had my second child in 2 years. And it was like a year and a half in that I was like, my teeth are not sensitive anymore. And I think it may be because I was able to pull those back into the body as well. Now, also pulling from my myofascial release, lymphatic side of the coin for this too. If that calcium is stored in the extracellular tissues, so you're thinking in the organs, but also in the muscles, all those cartilage, everything. That's where it's going to be stored. Anytime that we can support that myofascial system in terms of things like foam rolling with a really soft roller, using a modality where like melt method is one that I really like because it's easy for people to start with. And it helps, again, to bring some hydration to those tissues that are calcified and really hard and tough. So if someone, for example, if they start doing some of these things and they're like, oh, I'm feeling the calcium shelves, it's really starting to come out, or they feel really tight. One of my clients described it as, she said, it's like I want to wring out, it feels like I want to wring out a towel. Like the tension is just so much that it's like I want to wring it out like a dish towel. And I told her, doing some stuff with a gentle foam rolling, having someone do body work on you, massage, myofascial release, so beneficial because that's just going to help continue to break that up so it can go back into the bones as well.
Fantastic. Those are all really great tips. And I really love how you take a food first approach and aren't like this supplement, that supplement, and
yes,
recommending 20 different mineral and vitamin supplements. So that's really helpful for people for sure. And then the next minerals that I kind of wanted to touch base on that are, I would say, are they popular right now? I don't know, but zinc and copper.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Have you had to give up coffee for health reasons? Maybe because of the stress it was putting on your adrenals, maybe because it was messing with your sleep, maybe because you felt terrible after drinking it, or maybe because you were told coffee had mold on the beans and you needed to stay away from mold. Well, what if I told you there's an organic, mycotoxin-free, quality coffee that contains reishi spores or Ganoderma lucidum? Ganoderma lucidum helps to modulate your immune system, adapt to stress, balance hormones, and doesn't give you the jitters or shakes like regular coffee used to. Sounds too good to be true, right? It's called King Coffee by the company Organo. And King Coffee came into my life when I was struggling with chronic hives, full body eczema, and mast cell activation syndrome. I hadn't drank coffee in years because it made me feel anxious, shaky, and clammy. So I had no expectations that drinking King Coffee would be any different. However, I decided to give it a try after seeing lots of amazing practitioners talk about the benefits of reishi online. I tried a 7-day sample and the chronic hives were gone by day 5. I was in shock. After that, I dove into the research on reishi and found that there are over 3,000 peer-reviewed PubMed clinical trials using reishi Ganoderma as an intervention. The company Organo also has a patent protected on their harvesting process. They double crack open the spore shells, which makes them up to 80% more potent than the body of the reishi, which is usually used in other reishi products. This also makes the spores 90% more bioavailable for your body to use. If you would like to try King Coffee, visit thehealerrevolution.myorganogold.com, or for a 7-day trial, you can check out my link tree on my Instagram at Amanda Panacea.
And just how much they impact our ability to fight off mold, fungus, parasites, and some of the other toxins that people really seem to struggle with.
Yes. Yes. So those are very popular right now. And honestly, you'll see, because there's a lot of different, beliefs in terms of the zinc, the copper, and the right ratios. I've had people be like, oh, I don't even know the right ratio, the one on the test. I don't know if that's the right one. But we do know that, especially most people today, if they have been supplementing with an isolated zinc supplement for the last 2 or 3 years, how long has this whole thing been going on? This thing going around that we've been seeing. I have seen a lot of people who will come to me and they have a test done, and I'm already looking at their test because their zinc is so high relative to the copper that I'm already assuming what's been going on. And then Yes, I did zinc for 18 months, at a 40 milligrams per day or whatever they've been doing, like super high dose. And then they're wondering why they're now having also histamine reactions. So this is one of the weirdest things that I've seen over the last couple of years is where the zinc is really, really, really high, which is important for immune function. It helps us with the white blood cells and all of those aspects of our immune system. It does help us fight off pathogens, invaders, bacteria, everything. But then you have the copper, which is also important. And so people have this huge imbalance, and that ratio, when the ratio of zinc to copper is higher on the HTMA, I find that it correlates with people having more histamine intolerance, histamine issues, because that copper is low or biounavailable compared to the zinc, which is just overpowering everything. And that was my first test I ever did back in the day. And I had high zinc relative to the copper. And I was like, oh, it's because I was just doing zinc, because that's just what we do. We just take our zinc or ascorbic acid and, whatever else we do to boost the immune system. So that's one that I'm seeing, a lot of times in imbalance. You can also have where the zinc is very low. I've seen this as well. And then the copper is very high. Now, it's interesting to note that there are a lot of different views on what the high copper on the HTMA means. There's essentially two camps. There's one camp that will look at that and be like, you have way too much copper. We need to get that excess copper out. We need to, supplement with zinc at a high dose to be able to bring that into balance. And then there's actually really three views. But the second primary view is when you see the high copper on the HTMA, it means that copper is biounavailable. It's not actually being able to be used properly by the body. And it's because we need the retinol to make the copper bioavailable. And that's another pattern, again, that I'll see where the copper is really, really high, zinc's low. And for those people, it's usually they need more of the retinol. Now, sure, they may need more zinc, but I always do folks on like a whole food zinc source. So oysters are the king when it comes to zinc content, but they also contain a little bit of copper, some phosphorus, B12. They contain, and selenium. They contain because in nature, it's always packaged with other vitamins and minerals, not just vitamins, also minerals. They're all together. And so in that case, I would approach it more of supporting the body. Yeah, sure, we might do some extra zinc rich foods that already have copper, but we're also going to really work on the retinol piece, making the copper bioavailable. And I've also seen this too. So there is a difference, for example, if someone has a copper IUD, or they have copper in their water supply at their house. They have these old copper pipes that are really corrosive. That will sometimes come out on the HTMA. And it also can mean, again, biounavailable copper that the body is, sending out, releasing into the tissues. So, but the same kind of approach would apply. You would want to reinforce the minerals that are low relative to that, but you'd also want to add the vitamin cofactors. That's something I don't see discussed enough, is the vitamin cofactors to the minerals. Because some people just stay in the mineral side, but it's like, no, you got to have the vitamin A to balance with the copper to make ceruloplasmin, which, as I know you have read with Morley Robbins' work and all of his stuff, that just is mind-blowing, so interesting. With that, you need that to make ceruloplasmin, which is going to help you regulate iron, but it's also going to help with systemic inflammation in the body. And you need also, so for example, vitamin E is a vitamin that balances or synergizes with sodium and potassium. So if I see someone where their sodium and potassium is just not coming up, usually it is a lack of something like the vitamin E, because the vitamin E helps us retain that in the tissues. So, but with the zinc and the copper too, it is important to, I think, balance that in the diet too. So getting sources of, whole food sources that have the zinc in it, but also have the copper, have the manganese, have the other minerals. And then beef liver is the highest source of copper in pretty much in all the food sources you can get. But it also does have a little bit of zinc in it, but also has a ton of folate. And then it also has retinol. So it does have retinol in there. That's going to pair with the copper to make it available. But it's just, there are, like I said, most of the books that are out there on HTMA, they don't really teach the copper is bio unavailable. We need to be giving retinol. We need to be supporting this person's ability to metabolize this copper, because we do burn through a lot of copper. The slow metabolizer and oftentimes the fast metabolizer HTMA clients that I see, they oftentimes have no idea they've been low in the copper for a very long time, and repleting that can take time. Likewise, when it's high, the body again can take care of that. It can use it, burn it when it's bioavailable. But a lot of the books, like I was saying, focus more on the copper toxicity. We've got to add in a ton of zinc to oppose. But then what happens? Then the zinc's high and the copper is tanked. And fair to say, it doesn't happen overnight. So that's something that can happen over the course of months or even years sometimes for people. But to swing the pendulum, opposite of what it has been before. But it is just, I think, understanding the cofactors, can help you understand what's going on when you're seeing that on the test as well.
Yeah. And that is what the original doctor I saw back in 2015 told me, that I was copper toxic and that I should stay away from it. And I avoided it for a very long time. And then of course, when I went to grad school, I learned about vitamin A and retinol, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. And I started to question it and learn more about it. And, that's when I found beef liver, and I've been pretty much testing for, do I need beef liver ever since? And for years, and it's always coming up yes, every single time. And I do love recommending that for people, but I know some people still have a little bit of issues with beef liver. So there's also the Rosita cod liver oil, which can be fantastic for vitamin A as well. Do you have any other suggestions for like a whole food source of copper, vitamin A?
Yes. So my other favorite source for the retinol, we'll go on that one, so I do the Rosita. I also really love to do the whole cod livers, where it's just the whole liver. And that they actually have that on Amazon. It's imported from Iceland and it's in its own oil. I don't use the oil in there. I just drain it and use that. But one of those has a perfect ratio between vitamin A and vitamin D. So it's got a 3-to-1 ratio of those two vitamins in one serving. And it has it has about the same or a little bit more equivalent of retinol to the Rosita. And I find if people already like fish, if they mash it up with a salmon croquette or in a sardine salad or something like that, you really won't know it's there. I've had people use it. They're like, I don't believe that this is going to be any good. And they're like, oh, I can incorporate this 2 times a week or 1 time a week, depending. And you check the box on getting extra retinol. And I've also seen that be a game changer for people with chronic illness who are very depleted in that. Vitamin A is also antiviral. It has a lot of antiviral effects. So if someone is dealing with a bunch of different viruses, they're going to have trouble, repleting those stores of the retinol. Because I have also, like you were saying, I've found that people will be doing the beef liver, but the retinol is not enough for them. I have seen that many times over the last couple of years. And usually that's when I'm like, okay, you need to bring in the heavy hitters. You need to bring in the cod oil or the whole cod livers as well. Now, as far as another source of copper, so shellfish in general will have quite a bit of copper in it. The oysters are going to have more zinc than copper, of course. But some of the others, like even mussels, have manganese in them. They have B vitamins. They do have a little bit of copper and zinc together in there as well. And then I believe that crab is also higher in copper. It's one of the shellfish crustaceans. And also one that can be used sometimes as an adjunct. I don't like to use it as the only source of copper, but liquid chlorophyll is also high in sodium chlorophyll, chlorophylline and copper. So that can be used sometimes as an adjunct. Plus it's just easy to add in water, Also whole food vitamin C. So like Astrolo cherry, camu is going to have some copper content as well. And then a surprising source of copper, which I was surprised when I found this research because I was like, this can't be real. But cocoa powder and cacao powder actually have an appreciable amount of copper. Everyone thinks of them as having more magnesium, but they're more copper rich. So I have all kinds of theories about women, depending on what stage they are in their cycle, where they're like chocolate, they're after that copper hit. Maybe they're needing more copper to support their bodies. So copper is present in that. And even in the studies they actually did a study. It's one of my favorite ones where they took people who had copper deficient anemia and they gave them cocoa powder. I think it was like less than a quarter cup per day. It was not very much. And it was like Hershey's cocoa powder. So it was nothing nice and artisan. It was just from the grocery store. And they actually found that their hemoglobin went up. Their ceruloplasmin went up. Their serum copper went up when they were able to add that in, just a little bit of it every day. And I always thought, okay, well, cocoa powder is also high in oxalates. So we know like, okay, oxalate's going to cancel out the copper, but in that study, I was like, okay, maybe there is some validity to this in terms of getting copper from something like that. And of course, you wouldn't want to only get your copper from chlorophyll or cocoa powder, but when you put it in your day and it adds up, kind of like with the potassium, you do potassium-rich foods at your meals, maybe you do an adrenal cocktail. It all adds up at the end of the day to put you towards that goal.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Fantastic tips. So I feel like I could ask you so many mineral questions, but I just want to do one more about minerals and then we can move on.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about iron and just how important copper is and how wrong everyone is that thinks that they're anemic.
Oh, yes. This is like a daily basis.
Yeah.
Too. Daily basis with people like, I'm anemic. I need to take iron. I'm getting an iron infusion because my ferritin is low. And I'm just like, oh, please don't.
No.
It's so hard. It's literally so hard to buy. This is one of those ones where if I'm in a restaurant, if I'm in a restaurant and someone says something I don't agree with, or I hear someone, I'm like, whatever. If someone's like, I'm going to give my kid an iron infusion because I'm like, please, I would like get up and scream, please don't do that. So anyway, but yeah, so I actually learned about this more in the last 3 years, because again, when I started out, I thought, okay, you run labs, your hemoglobin's low, your ferritin's low, because that's, again, at the time, I didn't really know that there were more labs that you can run for iron status. And I just thought, okay, low iron, add more iron. But then when I started learning from Morley Robbins stuff, especially his book too, that I feel like that book, The Cure Your Fatigue, that really has so much of the nuances there, just really well explained and put into practice, like what to do about it in terms of if you think you have anemia. But I really learned about that, the copper and the vitamin A and ceruloplasmin connection, because the copper needs the vitamin A to combine to make ceruloplasmin, as Morley teaches. And we need that ceruloplasmin to be able to regulate iron properly. So a lot of times people will say they're anemic because their doctor ran hemoglobin and ferritin, or only ferritin. And ferritin's that storage form of iron. It's the iron that's more in the body tissues. It's not necessarily an active form of it. It's just sort of stored. So many people are just told to take iron and that's it. But really, if the human body requires that adequate level of ceruloplasmin to regulate that, because we do have that iron recycling system, as Morley teaches as well, where the body is constantly able to recycle that iron. In fact, they estimate, I think that this is the correct number, but they estimate that you only need, like, if you were needing iron, 1 to 2 milligrams, which is a tiny amount, per day to be able to, still have enough iron in the body, but regulate it through that iron recycling system. And for context, a birth control pill, so there's different types of birth control pills within that cycle that a woman will take it on. It has 75 milligrams in the placebo pill in a birth control sample, which is just a lot. Like, think about a woman in her cycling years, how many cycles she has per year. She has 12 cycles per year, around that much. She's getting, multiple, like whenever she has those placebo pills, however many she's doing, it's going to give her 75 milligrams. And that's not even counting the iron you're getting in your food and in your air and in your, everything that we're bombarded with iron from. We're going to also get it in there. So anyway, back to the anemia thing as well. So a lot of times people in their pattern on their blood work, so I run the labs where it's the full panel, the full Monty, where it's got all the components. I probably have them all memorized, so I could tell which ones they are. But you really would want to see things like a serum iron, which tells you just the iron at the moment that the sample was taken. You want to see that. You want to see total iron binding capacity. This is something that tells us how willing the body is to pull the iron out of storage and into circulation, or how it already has a lot in circulation and it needs to tamp down that effect. That's what the total iron binding is going to give you. Then you're going to have things like the unsaturated iron binding, which is going to tell you how saturated that sample is with the iron, the unsaturated iron, the iron saturation itself, which I have seen a lot of people where their doctor doesn't even order that one. That tells you the saturation of the iron in the sample. And high iron saturation in your blood is going to oftentimes mean that that's going to be going to your tissues later, because the body's like, what do we do with all this iron? Let's store it in the tissues. And then, as we know, that causes a whole lot of inflammation. There's so many links there to the high tissue iron in the body. And I think it's Morley who says too that if it is low in the blood, if iron's low in the blood, it's likely high in the tissue because of that balance. The body doesn't like to, do things that it's going to hurt itself. So it knows if it has too much iron in the body, in the bloodstream, it's going to cause a lot of inflammation. So it's like the best thing we can do that you're given this iron dust, the best thing we do is put it in storage and hope that keeps it out of the bloodstream, because it knows that it feeds pathogens, bacteria, parasites, all of those, any bacterium, basically it's going to use that iron for fuel. So it just is important when looking at that, especially if someone's told you're anemic, you need to have an iron infusion, you need to take supplemental iron, which I did. I did the supplemental iron. I did not do an iron infusion, but I did, just because a chiropractor was telling me, oh, you're pregnant with my first child, you need to do an iron. And I'm like, oh, why did I do that? But really understanding, working with someone who can run the full panel, because it can show you everything. It can show you your copper. It can show you your serum retinol. It can show you your ceruloplasmin, which is that copper and retinol together, which helps you regulate iron. I've run labs for the last, 2.5 years of this particular lab markers, and I've yet to see somebody that has good ceruloplasmin. It's just not like out of the gate. Some people, maybe they've been working on a little bit, but it's just one that you don't see people being optimal in. And then everything makes sense with what he's saying about that you do need that to regulate it properly, because if you don't regulate it, it's going to end up in your tissues, and then it's a long way out. That's why people will, for example, give blood, because they are, and it's really cool. I've actually had a couple of clients that have gotten to see their labs before and after, what happens when you give blood, and it is fascinating. You do the full panel before, it's showing their body's not mobilizing iron. Maybe they got a high iron saturation. Sometimes they'll have a high ferritin too, which can indicate inflammation. You do an after lab, and it's like, wow, the body is like, okay, let's start taking the iron out of the tissues, mobilizing into the blood, and that whole system is now working again. Whereas before it was just kind of stuck. It was kind of stuck in neutral. The body couldn't really figure out, how to get all that out. And it's especially important for men too, because women, of course, we have, women of childbearing age, you're going to have a cycle. You're going to lose blood in that, but men don't, unless they go to war and, are wounded in war, they're not going to have bleeding. So that's why for men, especially being aware of that, keeping that in mind when, viewing iron, especially if you are a man and your doctor has told you, or if it's your husband and your doctor's told them they need to do iron, I would pursue other options to make sure that, you're getting the real picture, because it's not that anyone is like, oh, you need to always ignore what this doctor is saying. They have a reason. They don't have they have a reason for doing that. They don't have that holistic training that the people who are looking at the whole body system do. They're not able to get all of those moving pieces. And frankly, they don't have the time. They don't have the time to sit down with people and be like, what was your childhood like? Did you eat fortified cereals when you were great? They don't ask that. There's 10 minutes and you've got to make the decision. Okay, what am I going to recommend for this person? And they just have to do what their training is, because they just have that training, and they don't have in medical school, they barely get any training on nutrition, which is a shame. So that's when it is good to get a second opinion, to get someone who can help you understand that, to know the best course of action for your case.
Yeah. It's something that always makes me wonder, though, is with doctors, how have they not noticed that what they're doing doesn't work yet?
Yes.
If I was a doctor and was telling everyone who was anemic to take iron and then redoing their labs and looking at them again and being like, didn't work, never works. Why wouldn't I go a little bit deeper?
Mm-hmm. That's something I've thought of too. Like, someone will say, oh, I'm on my third iron infusion. It's still not working. And I'm like,
who is driving that decision?
Yeah, like it honestly blows my mind. Like that, and that whatever that quote is, the definition of sanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. That's exactly what goes on in this situation. And it's hard to watch. It's hard to watch. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it is. Well, that was fascinating. Thank you. I'm sure it's really going to blow a ton of people's minds. And I hope that, it changes somebody's decision to not take iron in the future. So thank you so much for that.
Yes, absolutely.
So now I want to kind of just ask you a little bit of questions on like how your business is set up, because I think that this is really fascinating to a lot of people. I'm sure you get a lot of people asking like, okay, I just went through this health crisis and now I want to like go to school and change my career and work with people, but I don't know where to start. So like, what does your business look like now? Maybe what did it look like a couple of years ago? And what does your day-to-day look like?
Yes. So a couple years ago, when I first got started after I graduated from the NTA, and I guess it was 2014, and I've had certifications since then, after that. But at the beginning, I really didn't have the lab privileges, the ability and the knowledge to run the lab. So I kind of just did more of like, nutrition coaching and that kind of thing. And honestly, looking back, if I could have changed one thing, I would probably be like, start learning about the labs at the outset, so that I could be able to offer that as part of what I do, because I think it's so powerful when you can show someone on a lab like, hey, this is why you can't sleep, and this is probably why your adrenals are misfiring. This is why your digestion is not working well and why you can't sleep or don't have energy. It really can be empowering to the patient client to see that is possible to change those markers, help them feel better with some changes. So I did that. And then I did start getting interested into HTMA. And that was, like I said, three years ago where I started to get interested in that, to add that to my practice. So I now run that. And I honestly, the best advice, because I did a class with, her name's Lydia Joy. She did it's HTMA Practitioner Jumpstart. And it's just a Jumpstart program. That's the only one I've done. There are 4 or 5 other HTMA programs out there. I did that one to start with, and you don't have to have a certification to run the HTMA. You do need some kind of a nutritional certification to open an account with the lab, but you don't have to have a certification to do that. You just need experience. You just need to get started with it. So for me, I got started with that. And I will say that her class did not teach as much of the iron retinol. I had to learn that later. And so that's my only thing where I'm like, I don't know if there's one that teaches all of that I learned after, that I kind of plugged in, to my knowledge of the HTMA, but it was like a great place to start on that particular piece. And one of the things she said was, she was like, when you get out of here, you're going to learn the most when you start working with people. And that's exactly what happened with me. So I would tell people, I'd be like, hey, back at the beginning, like, hey, this is a new tool that I'm using. Would you like to work with me using this tool? And it's, obviously going to be a discount since this is a new thing I'm doing. And that's how I got started with it. And by the time you've run, 100 tests or so, you start to be like, okay, I think I understand what's going on. I understand how to, give advice to people on that. And so really just jumping in, because I know people have imposter syndrome. They feel like I can't get started until I have 15 other certifications or whatnot, but really just starting with what you have and then learning as you go. And, with your clients, I learned the most from the clients that I work with. Every time on the HTMA, there'll be something, literally every time something new, where I'm like, I didn't know that beryllium is an antagonist for magnesium. So that's why you've been losing your magnesium, and probably why you can't maintain levels of that in your blood or in your hair. Interesting. It's like every time there's something new. And then I think it was a year after that, I did a functional blood chemistry, actually did one with Michael Rutherford, and he teaches the iron, kind of that iron piece as well. I feel like he has a good balance on that too, as far as understanding what the different patterns could mean. And it's also very physiology based. So much information I learned in that. And I would just kind of spin off and research things as I was interested in them. So for example, on the iron one, really went down the rabbit hole in that about 2 years ago, as far as figuring out how that works with the blood labs, but also the HTMA, because I use both. I use HTMA blood labs primarily in my practice working with people. And so once I had those two, I really felt like that gave me a good balance of things to work with, because the reason why you want to do the tissue for minerals, and then also you can do the blood too. But really why the hair tissue is so helpful is because most of the body's mineral stores are outside of the bloodstream. So all the time people say, my potassium was low on my labs. And then I'll clarify, did you mean the blood labs or the hair labs? Because there is a difference there. Most of the stores are outside in the tissues and cells. So the hair is an extension of that internal cellular environment. It interfaces with lymph, blood, and other interstitial fluids before it comes out the follicle. So you're getting a little blueprint of that in the hair follicle. And that's why you sample also closest to the hair or closest to the root to make sure you're getting that accurate printout of what's happening there. So I test that, but then you can see it in the blood. So when you do a blood test for sodium, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, you can oftentimes see things going on there. For example, with low or high aldosterone, that'll show up on the labs. And then I can look at the hair and go, yep, they're losing their sodium and potassium. And then the labs, it's also low too. So here's how we can incorporate, recommendations for that. So it really gives you like here's what's happening right now at this very moment in the bloodstream. And then here's what's happening in the last, I guess it's 2 to 3 months of time frame that the hair test shows. So that's kind of how I've used those. And then a day to day, I have 2 children who are both under 4 years old. So I kind of balance, my work and my client load at the times where my husband, who also works full time. So for any moms out there who are also like, how do we fit all this in, do things? In my case, I just kind of make it work. I do appointments on the weekends sometimes, and that is also helpful for moms who also need their partner or husband to be home at the time when they're having the appointments so they can concentrate. But I also do appointments in evenings, and I really work with women on the HCMA, the blood labs, but then there's also the wing of my business that's more of the fascia and the lymphatic system and exercise, kind of restorative piece to the puzzle with that. I do that virtually. I do that in person sometimes as well. I just got a training earlier this year for CFT, craniosacral fascial therapy. So I've kind of started doing that a little bit in person with people, and I really enjoyed that aspect of my work too, because a lot of times people will want help with the exercise or the movement piece. Maybe their lymphatic system is sluggish. We can look at that in conjunction with the labs, because that oftentimes, again, everything's connected to everything else. So when you can have those two together, you can kind of see that they correlate and have a good picture on how to help people with it. So that's kind of what I do these days. It is kind of crazy sometimes, like trying to, again, being a mom, balancing all the other stuff I do, because I love researching and really geeking into things. But it is something that I enjoy. Like I've thought before, like, do I just cut all this out because it is busy? It's busy, but it's like, it's my outlet. Like it's my outlet to express the things that I'm learning that other people may find interesting or helpful. And that's kind of how I view it. It's not even, it is my work, but also it's like, it's my passion to share things. I just really enjoy that.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah. So when the saying, when you are passionate about what you do, you're never working. So
yes, that's true for me. It certainly feels like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you manage a really successful Instagram, and that alone takes a lot of work. It's just making videos takes like, when I first learned how to make a reel, I was like, this is just like, it took me an hour. I don't think I'm going to do this.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot. Like, and I even on, so TikTok too. I don't know. I have an account there. I don't really do much with it, but I have discovered that I guess it's just the age group on TikTok. They're not very nice. They're just not very nice. And they don't understand, it's like me, I'm like a grandma, even though I'm 30, it's like I'm a grandma and they're the teenagers, and they're like, why are you talking about tape in your mouth, grandma? Like that's kind of what they, that's sort of what they have this vibe of. So sometimes I'll be on there a little bit, but not much, because I'm like, Gen Z is not into this right now. Maybe they'll get into it. I always say it's like, they'll get into it once they've tried too many celebrity diets or, crash their adrenal. Then they'll be like, okay, grandma, I'll listen to you about taking your mouth and drinking your coffee after you've, eaten something with protein or whatever it is that I posted on there. It's really funny. So
that's hilarious.
It's just not nice. So warning to anyone who is like, oh, I want to put my business on. I'm not a fan so far.
Okay. Good advice. And so you work with one-on-one, obviously. And then do you have group programs? I know you have a lot of free stuff on your website that people can check out videos.
Yes. So I actually do have 2 courses that I have ready to go that I did over the last year. So I have a program that's more of an 8-week, like a group program that I do that's called Metabolism Rehab. And it's kind of what we were talking about earlier about the women who are realizing, okay, I'm not fueling myself appropriately. Maybe I'm not putting minerals in my water, those kind of things. It helps people understand that physiology piece and how to apply that to their life. It's kind of like a little launch pad program. Like it's 8 weeks. You have a Zoom call. We meet on a Zoom call in a group every week for the time frame of that. And it does have a lot of mineral content in it too, as far as the basics, because it is good to have something like an HTMA to tell you where your minerals are at, but you can still do some of those basic things. You can still restore trace minerals, sodium, potassium in the diet. And that's kind of some of the things that I incorporate there. And then I also have my prenatal nutrition program called Minerals and Motherhood. And that is my pregnancy specific program. It also covers some aspects of postnatal depletion and also even preconception as well. So I have that available, and it's a self-paced program. And that's where I share a lot of what I learned after having my daughter and then getting pregnant with my son right away when she was 10 months old. What I applied to that pregnancy that made it better for me than the first, as far as, health, energy, out postpartum, all of that. So it's very minerals focused as well. And yeah, so those are the 2 that I have. And I run the metabolism one a couple times per year. And then I periodically open the registration for the Minerals and Motherhood one. And then I also actually have an ebook that I released, I guess it was a couple weeks ago, that is on mineral elixirs. So it's like recipes for things like mineral elixirs, adrenal cocktail, because I started to collect recipes for that. When you work with clients, people are like, I don't like orange. What do you got instead of orange for the adrenal cocktail? And I'm like, how about grapefruit or pineapple? Or, so I came up with like all these different variations and sourcing information. So I have that too. That's kind of more of something that someone could just get as like a quick start on learning about minerals, as far as, trace minerals, adding to water, hydration, all of that too. So
perfect. Yeah. You have so many great offers out there.
Thank you.
And one last question, is there anyone who shouldn't do tons of minerals? Is there any minerals that you can take too much of, or can you OD on minerals?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So I think that, of course, it will depend on the person too, but I have seen, for example, if someone has a history of like heavy metals, so they have aluminum, a mercury, maybe even they tested for it, maybe they don't, they just remember, oh, when I was a kid, we used to play with the mercury of the thermometers from that era or something like that. They may just remember that. Those people do need to be a little bit more careful, because they can have more of a detox reaction to certain compounds. So for example, something like shilajit, I've had people have major detox reactions. And for those who are not sure or don't know what shilajit is, it's just a trace mineral compound that's got fulvic acid in it. And it comes in these little tablets or liquid. I've had people have pretty like extreme detox reactions if they're not working on their detoxification organs alongside that. So that's when I am careful with people with a lot of heavy metal detoxification symptoms. So that's when working with someone can be helpful for that. As far as if you can overdose on minerals, I think that it depends on the mineral and if it's isolated or if it's in a food form. So if someone is taking like a multivitamin that has a ton of zinc and copper together, along with some random vitamin C, certainly the body is gonna absorb and use that in the body differently than it would if you decide to eat a plate of fried beef livers and oysters. So I always tend to take that's why I tend to take that food first. If someone's not sure, they can still get mineral-rich foods in their food and not have to worry about the isolated things causing an issue. With trace minerals, I honestly, most everyone I see needs some level of repletion on those, especially if you're using a formula that doesn't have a very high concentration, that's not super powerful. Starting off very slow, regardless, you would want to just do like a drop, 2 drops, 3 drops, and see how you tolerate it. But really, my issue is more with the people doing high doses of isolated rather than as it's found in nature. That's when we tend to have issues. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And especially, I'm careful with potassium too, for like the cream of tartar. That's a big one.
Yes, people have really, I've had people where they will think, oh, it's really high in potassium when you use a teaspoon. I'm like, please don't use a teaspoon. You will probably run to the bathroom, for that one too. That's one where if someone's doing an adrenal cocktail and it calls for a quarter teaspoon, I would do a pinch or an eighth of a teaspoon just to make sure that it doesn't, throw your body off. Because honestly, that's something else too, is that the more the body needs it. So if I run an HMA and someone's potassium's a 1 or 0.5 or something really low, and they start adding in potassium, sometimes their body can freak out and react to it, because it's almost like, I like to describe it like, it's like a little puppy dog that you're giving it a bone, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're gonna get the bone. And with your body, it's like, oh my gosh, the potassium, we've been waiting for this for years, you're finally giving it to us. And it can have that like reaction, extremely flaring up reaction. So yes, that's one too, where it's like, might want to not do a lot of it. And then for kidney, so people with kidney issues, there's a relationship between sodium and potassium in the kidneys. If the kidneys don't have enough potassium for a very long period of time due to stressors or whatever else, you can end up then in the end, the kidney is not able to utilize the potassium properly. And that's why someone like on a renal failure diet, they have very little potassium in it, because the kidneys now have been damaged because there's been not enough potassium, there's been too much sodium, and that affects the kidneys. Then people are not able to process it. That's why the renal, because I'll get questions about that. Why is a renal diet low in potassium when we know potassium is essential for the kidneys? And it's like, because it's a long-term thing. People are getting way more sodium in their refined foods, almost no potassium. Then you end up in the end with the renal issues too.
Fascinating. Awesome. Well, I could probably ask you like a million more questions, but just let people know where to find you so they can kind of binge on all of your amazing content that you have as well.
Yes. Thank you. So Instagram, my Instagram is _ and then muscles and motherhood, just spelled out. And then my website is MB as in Margaret Barry -fitness.com. That's my website. And honestly, I need to update my website a little bit to reflect some of my new stuff, but really I post the most on Instagram, and then my YouTube channel as well, which is linked on my Instagram.
Okay, perfect. All right, Margaret. Well, this was just such an incredible conversation. You're such a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you. This was really so much fun. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening to the Healer Revolution podcast. If you're enjoying what you're listening to, please do me a favor and like, subscribe, leave a comment, anything that can help get this information out to more people who may be struggling. You can also find me online at thehealerrevolution.com or amandapanacea.com, and you can also find me on Instagram at amandapanacea. Thank you so much for joining the revolution.